Okay, hello and welcome everyone to this roundtable on the state of the art in the field of Quran translation, our project GLOCO, the Global Quran, and this is also taking place in the context of the opening of an exhibition of Quran translations in the Uniseum in Freiburg. I have with me Helen Blatherwick, Sohaib, Saeed, and Gulnaz Sibgatullina. And first of all, I would like to ask each of you to introduce herself or himself and tell us a bit about your connection both to the field of Quran translation, your own work in it maybe also, and also to our project GLOCO.
Hi, I'm Helen Blatherwick. Until recently, actually until the end of this last year, I was the executive editor of the Journal of Quranic Studies. So I've got a kind of overarching interest in the field of Quranic studies and also translation. And I've also been involved in the project as copy editor of the output of Johanna and her colleagues over the last few years.
Hi everyone, I'm Sohaib Saeed. Nice to see colleagues here again and meet new people who are interested in Quran translation. I had a sort of 1 year, 1.5 year involvement with the project as a postdoctoral researcher. This was after I did my PhD at SOAS in the field of Quran interpretation. Before that, studies in Al-Azhar University in Egypt on tafsir. So I'm looking forward to share with you some of the things that I learned along the way.
Thank you. Thank you so much, first of all, for the invitation to be here. My name is Gulnaz Sibgatullina, and I'm assistant professor at the University of Amsterdam. And we know each other from the beginning of the project because I was in parallel employed as a postdoc within another project called European Quran. And throughout, indeed, the COVID years and afterwards, we kept in touch because there was a lot of overlap in terms of research we were doing, and with some of the PhDs within this project, I share interest in Quran translations in Eastern Europe, particularly. Thanks.
Yeah, and I also have to mention we actually had an online reading group, which was mostly initiated by Gulnaz, which was hugely helpful during all the lockdowns. The first question is maybe like from your perspective, why is it even interesting to do research on Quran translation? Because for a long time, it hasn't really been a thing. Like we have had reviews of individual translations that have mostly evaluated them for perceived philological correctness or dogmatic correctness or whatever. But this was also mostly focused on the output of Orientalist scholarship. And even if we look at entries on Quran translations in the major encyclopedias in the field in English, it's usually about the European history, the Orientalist translation from the Latin Middle Ages until the 20th century mostly. Why would it be interesting to study Quran translations beyond this maybe very narrow attempt to evaluate translations for their usefulness to researchers?
Okay, well, that's quite a big question to start off with. One of the main reasons I guess, is because the Quran is read in so many different ways. And in terms of theological differences between kind of the various communities and scholars over time who study it, and so the idea of so it's quite important to look at the text from many different points of view, if you see what I mean, interpretive view, which is where your project is particularly interesting because it does look at the different readings rather than saying this translation is correct or this translation is not correct. And obviously one of the first rules of translation is that there is not really any such thing as a kind of correct translation of a complex text like the Quran. So from that point of view, I don't know if that answers at all.
Thanks. It's interesting to maybe pick up on the point Helen mentioned that obviously in certain modes of analysis it doesn't make sense to talk about correct versus incorrect. But then within a kind of internal framework, if I can say, where we have the field of tafsir and usul al-tafsir, that's to say the principles that underpin it, many people would be happy to talk about correct versus incorrect. So part of our analysis is obviously looking at those perspectives and what they're based on, and disputes that happen, and that can be very interesting in terms of the historical aspect, which for me was the thing that Glowcore opened up for me the most, and which I learned a lot, especially from your post, Johanna, where you, in this Quran translation of the week, you know, that took us to different parts of the world, different languages, and oftentimes, you know, really a very complex history of a particular place, of a particular time, community, the agendas and state actors involved. And that's the kind of thing that for me was very much a learning curve of just entering into that kind of thing. I maybe come from that place where it is more about correct versus incorrect, or let's say, what are the principles that would lead us more towards something that we can be more confident to call correct. So what are, in the first place, the problems that a Quran translator faces? And then what are the various ways that he or she can go about addressing those problems? So I have been, maybe before the project, but especially after the project, also a practitioner of Quran translation with various projects and ongoing things now. So the importance then on a personal level has been to understand better what is involved through the experiences of others, through also the controversies that arise over certain things, as I think that really informs the ongoing practice of Quran translation, to put it in context.
I think in many answers that the questions that you pose here, I will be also responding from the experiences that I had with our project, with European Quran Project, and the very fact that two rather large research ideas have been funded around the same year, for me is also a sign that there has been a broader interest and a need to understand something about the Muslim communities, and also in relation to European history. And I think in this regard, Quran stands just as one aspect that is of course very important, receives a lot of attention. And I think the value of the Glowcore research was that you guys also showed how you can study some of the big themes like globalization, colonial impact through Quran translation, a lens that is probably not the most obvious one. However, I think the one that can shed a lot of light also in terms of connections that existed between communities that we may not have paid attention before. And I think in this regard, a lot of research has been done on Bible translation and colonialism, for instance, but there has been total lack, I would say, on the same type of research with the relation to Quran. And I think the Glowcore did really amazing job trying at least to start filling in this gap.
Thank you. So that raises for me another question that has come up repeatedly. So a lot of times when people talk to me about the project, especially non-Muslims, like from the German context, they say, oh, isn't it like a daring project? Isn't it courageous? Like, because the Quran is such a sensitive project, such a sensitive topic to Muslims. And my actual experience has been rather positive. I haven't experienced a lot of hostility. There have been some kind of debates on social media, for example, in some cases when we have discussed controversial translations, for example, by the Ahmadiyya movement, you will get some backlash by people who say, oh, but they are not Muslim, or like a Jewish translator in some cases. But all in all, the feedback was rather positive. And so, yeah, this brings me to asking, like, maybe what is the potential of such research also for doing projects, pursuing questions that go beyond this divide between non-Muslim Orientalists and Muslim, which is still there, I think, also in the heads of many people in academia in Europe and the global north in general, but also what are maybe the boundaries, the limits, where does it end, where would it start creating problems?
So I think that this speaks to where we are in terms of the engagement between, let's say, Western modes of studying Islam, Eastern modes of studying Islam. And, every time you say something like this, you also feel dissatisfied with these descriptions because it's so much more complicated than that in good ways. And I think this project has helped in a way to open up conversations between different strands of that. you know, I still observe the type of things that are written and published about Qur'an translations from centers of learning like my alma mater. And we have this, again, still a hyper focus on certain things to do with correctness. On a linguistic level, a lot of times they are writing about ideological and creedal things. So a whole PhD thesis that was actually produced by a European who went to Saudi Arabia about Muhammad Assad. But it is fundamentally a Saudi Arabian thesis, right, about this, you know, very complex figure who's Muhammad Assad, that tries to boil it down to how wrong he is because of maybe influences he had or things that he mentioned or people that he was friendly with. So I am really personally very interested in seeing an improvement in, let's say, Muslim world studies, you know, places like Al-Azhar. You know, I'm visiting some institutions in different countries, recently in Malaysia, trying to speak to people there. I would like them to look at the example set by GLOCOR to see as well how they can further their own modes of research in a way that makes sense within their own context, but which expands the points of interest and, you know, maybe moves on from things that we're focused on to draw in, as Gulnaz pointed out, you know, the very many interesting areas of study that overlap with the stories of Quran translation. Shall I go next to you?
Yeah, I think in answering your question, I will turn maybe attention to you guys, because I think in the fact that you didn't receive that much backlash that otherwise other groups could have received, I think also has really a lot to do with the type of research that you and your team really conducted over the last years. It's first of all, I mean, for me, the personal importance was that you as a group also decentered Quran in terms of that it can be something that is very much speaking about a lot of different regions, so not only about Arabic-speaking Muslims. And I think that has been also something that you guys did a lot of work bringing in, and for that I think a lot of people also felt a lot of respect. But also in terms of type of research, just the depth of it and indeed the carefulness to attention, I think also makes it possible just to engage in a discussion that is very respectful. So I think, yes, the topic remains very sensitive, but it's also about the integrity of the group and what kind of goals and aims you have. And I think the type of research that you did just shows that even sensitive topics can be handled in a very nice and good way.
Thank you. Now we're all blushing.
Well, you guys have basically covered a lot of what I would say. But yeah, I mean, I think the project's part of the success of the project is that it has just definitely kind of globalized the study of translation of the Quran. As editor of Journal Quranic Studies, we get a lot of articles coming in on translation, and they all tend to be the kind of study that Sohaib was talking about, where it's focused on the creedal aspects and criticizing the creedal aspects of someone's translation and how they potentially, you know, should have done it, have misinterpreted things, or kind of what is, and it tends to be quite focused on single translations. Whereas what's great about your project is that you have really opened up the arena, apart from the methodological sort of differences that Gulnaz was talking about. And so, for example, the Quran Translation of the Week blog, which has, I don't know how many posts there are now, but you know, there's just hundreds 209 translations of the Quran into languages from all around the world, sort of from Mauritius to South Africa to like the Russian post-Soviet states and everything, and that and that's just sort of really opened up the whole field. And then obviously the individual projects that everyone's been doing as well on, you know, on the kind of like Tata Places and Mikhailo's study of the Saudi Arabian kind of Quran publishing industry and all that. There's kind of, it's really methodologically opened up the field in a really fantastic and sort of methodologically sensitive, I think, and open way, if that makes sense.
Okay, so now we have received a lot of praise. Thank you. The big question is now, where should it go from here? Where can it go from here, and where should it go from here? What would be the next steps? What remains to be done? What is lacking? Are there any blind spots that you can think of, or any future projects that would be great to have?
again, I'm coming here, I think, from things that I'm personally interested in, and trying to nudge you exactly sort of like, okay, what will be really interesting for me to read as maybe as continuation of this project. I'm thinking about the change of the Quran also as an object. It started as orally transmitted, then it has been written, it has been printed, and indeed you guys did really good job also at the exhibition showing indeed these developments from handwritten text to translations, and and I'm thinking what will be the next step. So I think we are moving away from texts as humanity to more visual, think about videos, think about imagery. So I'm purely interested also what will happen to Quran, so how the next generations will be learning it, and whether we do already see some process happening now, because I think one of the corners of the exhibition that shows there is already a lot of color, and that already the printing formats have changed. So I'm wondering, maybe with a little bit looking forward into the future as well, what do you think will indeed happen to the Quran indeed as an object, and how the knowledge will be transmitted across the communities, for instance, across the individual Muslims in the new era when more and more things will be, I think, more fed to us visually rather than on the text base.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose moving on from what Gulnaz was saying, I mean, the other kind of relatively new thing is obviously the advent of online translations of the Quran, where like on Quran.com you can have like 5, 6 different translations all on the page together. And I guess that would be the kind of internet Quran would be another area. But to be honest, I think that because the whole project is kind of groundbreaking, there is a lot left to be done. I mean, I think you could fruitfully keep the project going for kind of quite a lot longer. Obviously, you can't because of funding issues and things. But there are, although you've done a huge amount, there are many things that are left to be kind of explored.
If we have any rich donors here,
So yeah.
Yeah, it's nice that Quran.com got a shout out, because I'm responsible for the translations on Quran.com. And in fact, we're producing a new translation, this one, the Assured translation based on Ibn Ashur's tafsir. Really trying to use the scope that's provided by digital formats to reimagine how a translation can look and how it can be interacted with beyond the strictures of the book format. So that's an exciting dimension. I would say something separate from this, though, since the point was made about the digital futures. I think in the academic futures, going back to the point about, that unsatisfactory division between outsider-insider perspectives and Muslim world, Muslim institution perspectives, I think that I would like to see the emergence of a field which, grandly we could call usul tarjumat al-Quran, the principles of Quran translation, because it's sort of strange that such hasn't really been addressed before, attempted before, except in this kind of like individualistic analysis of different translations. But maybe something bigger which can then be fruitful in generating good translations into lots of languages upon well-defined parameters, right? So yes, still according to a variety of perspectives and preferences, but at least with some understanding about what is involved in the general field. Because I think that already with this project, we have seen maybe a shift in the Western academic categories from Quranic studies to then tafsir studies, which of course, Johanna, you've been instrumental in helping to carve out a space for something called tafsir studies, where we look at tafsir as a genre, and then we've got Quran translations, which could be seen as also a subset of that. And I think that from the sort of generative, constructive, internal Islamic academic perspective, there might be a movement towards looking at not only usul al-tafsir, but also the principles of translating of the Quran.
Thank you so much. Personally, I also think that if we go back in history, like the project has mostly focused on the 20th and 21st centuries, we still see that there are so many lacunae because, yeah, very often we found ourselves wondering like what traditions a particular translation into a particular language might go back to, and then we find that there's hardly any research about the local exegetical traditions in this language. And now we have some scholars working on this for particular regions, like Erfan Notawab, who is sitting here in the audience, is working on Quran manuscripts from Southeast Asia, for example. But this is also not really connected. So we have people working on West Africa, we have people working on Southeast Asia, but it's still very little, and there's no bigger framework to understand the history that actually led to the developments occurring in the 20th and 21st century. So yeah, this is something that I would add from my perspective. So is there anything else that any of you feels should be said in this context regarding any of the questions I've asked or beyond this?
No burning need to say anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just say that I'm really looking forward to the publications of the PhD students, because I think they've been working on really amazing projects, and I think I've seen glimpses here and there, but not the entire work as a whole. So good luck with finishing the last bits, and yeah, looking forward to reading.
And I would also say that the team has modeled something wonderful. You know, within this team there is diversity of where people come from, what they're interested in, religious diversity as well. And I think that is really something which speaks to, you know, the potential of Quran translation also to be that place where people can come together.
Okay.
I can't really add anything to that.
Okay. So yeah, this is a great opportunity for me to also extend my heartfelt thanks to the team, first of all, because it's a fantastic team. Elvira Kulieva, Kamran Khan, Julia Rizwan, and Mikhailo Jakubovic. It's been really a great pleasure and very rewarding to work with you. And I wish it could go on. But yeah. This was really a fantastic experience, and many thanks to all of you. And thank you all also for the people who had this conversation with me, Helen Blatherwick, Sohaib, Saeed, and Gulnaz Sibgatullina, who came here to celebrate with us the opening of this exhibition, and maybe not celebrate, but mourn the end of the project. Thank you.